Good morning and welcome to the Williamsburg Botanical Gardens Learn and Grow programs, a almost monthly seminar that is presented by the garden. My name is Judith Alberts and I serve on the board of directors. We have some housekeeping for today. Yes, we are recording. All registrants will receive an email with a link to the recording, which will be up on YouTube. And if everything goes the way it should, the email follow-up will come out tomorrow within 48 hours at the latest. Please make sure that you are muted and your microphone is off. We recommend you turn off your camera for privacy and close other applications that will chew up your bandwidth and interfere with the Zoom platform. We'll be using the chat box for your questions and our speaker will answer them at the end. And please bear with us if we run into any technical glitches. We're volunteers here. So a little bit about the garden. To our regular garden visitors, volunteers, and Learn and Grow attendees, it's great to have you with us again. Thank you for joining us. And for new guests, welcome. The first thing to know about the garden is that it is open every day of the year from 7 a.m. until dusk, and it is always free to visit. And canines are welcome to bring well-behaved humans on a leash if they choose to visit. Williamsburg Botanical Garden is really quite small. It's only 2 acres inside a traffic circle, using my cursor, that you come across about 3/4 of a mile on the access road before you get to the parking lot. This is the interpretive center where we used to hold these sessions in person before COVID, and we hope to go back to in-person sessions in January. But even though we're only 2 acres, we pack a lot into it. There are 18 distinct areas of the garden, and they include things, just to name a few: a wildflower meadow, woodlands, an English-style cottage garden, wetlands, and native grasses, to name only a few. Our garden is intentionally more natural than what you would expect from the words botanical garden. We are not a precisely manicured display of high maintenance plantings. We're more like a wild child in that we emphasize native plants and practices that will support pollinators, such as leaving standing stems during the winter to provide food and habitat. And if you'll notice this sign, we are officially registered as Monarch Butterfly Way Station number 3394. The garden's mission is to demonstrate environmentally responsible and sustainable gardening and to offer education on those topics. Everything in the garden is tended and maintained by dedicated volunteers. We do it on a very slim budget, so yes, here comes the pitch. The WBG is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we receive no funding from any government agency at any level. Our Learn and Grow programs are free. Under normal circumstances, there would be a donations jar at the registration desk, and that used to be a really steady stream of income for the garden, but that has changed with COVID. And so today's follow-up email will include a link to our virtual donations jar. If you are local and would like to support the garden further, please consider a membership. If you order bulbs from Brent and Becky's in Gloucester, if you start at bloomandbucks.com, Brent and Becky's donates 25% of your order to the nonprofit of your choice, those that are registered with Brent and Becky's. And let's not forget about Amazon, especially with Prime Days coming up this next week. If you shop on Amazon, please start at smile.amazon.com so that a portion of your purchase will support the garden or any other nonprofit of your choice. Now, everything is anonymous. We don't know who you are. We don't know what you buy. We don't know what you spend. We only know that as of the 17th, we had 28 customers supporting us, and that's very exciting because a year ago when we started monitoring our dashboard, we had 5, and I was one of them. So just this last May, we received a check or a deposit of $20.19, and every penny helps. The garden is on Facebook. And if you raise monarch butterflies, because we're now in that season, please join us on the Milkweed Connection Facebook group. And it is for local people only, because those of us who raise monarchs often get to the point where we are suddenly in a panic and we can't find any milkweed. And this is, if you've got milkweed, share it. If you need milkweed, ask for it. The garden is on YouTube, and this is where we'll post today's recording. And we are on Instagram. Learn and Grow programs are going to take a summer break and will return in October. But do mark your calendar for September 11th and 12th. The Butterfly Festival is returning this year, but it will be in a modified format. And the last item before I introduce today's speaker, Master Gardeners and Master Naturalists may count today's session for continuing education. Today's program is all about cicadas. Our speaker is Sean T. Dash, PhD, who is an assistant professor of biological sciences at Hampton University here close by in Hampton, Virginia. His curriculum vitae, I know I'd mispronounce that, vitae, I always do that, is impressive. To say that he has studied and taught for over 20 years does not even begin to scratch the surface. He is, among other things, a myrmecologist, meaning that he studies the specific science of ants. His focus is on biodiversity and understanding the role that arthropods play in ecosystem form and function, especially in urban habitats. He is the group administrator for the Ship's Naturalist, which is a very cool Facebook group about exploring and understanding nature. And Dr. Dash has been a Learn and Grow speaker for the garden in past years, and we are honored to welcome him back. So thank you and welcome to Dr. Sean T. Dash. Sean, I'm stopping my share. The screen and the mic are yours.
Great, and thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here today. Although it's a wonderful day to go out and explore, you can all do that after we get done a little bit, talking about cicadas and having a good time learning about what we've been seeing a good bit in the news, but also recognizing that the cicadas that are around all the time. And so this will be a wonderful kind of lecture to get you oriented to what's going on for the rest of the summer. And it's a great time if you're interested in cicadas to go out and explore in our region that's just starting to get going. So if you have questions as we go along, please put them in the chat and we'll try to answer everything at the end. So I thought one of the best ways to start off talking about cicadas is just to see if we know what a cicada is and what a cicada looks like, and do we recognize a cicada on site. So I have a few slides that I wanted to present, and we'll just play a quick game so you can use the chat of cicada or not, or you could just be quiet and do this in your own mind and say, is this a cicada? Or no, it's not a cicada. But we'll start off with this. So if you want, you could put it in the chat again, not just mentally say, yeah, it's a cicada, or I don't know. So first is this example. Is that a cicada or not a cicada? And what I hope is I see a few people using the chat saying, yes, it is a cicada. And it's our largest cicada in Virginia, the northern dusk-singing cicada. It's quite large, about 3 or so inches. Late summer is when they are found. but a wonderful cicada nevertheless. All right, what about this cicada or not? So I see a no, I see some questions. Oh, what is that? That is an interesting looking creature, but it is in fact not a cicada. It's known as a jumping plant louse. They're more closely related to aphids than they are cicadas, but they have a very similar body look to them. But as you can see on this top image, this is a little piece of paper that the insect's glued onto. So for really tiny insects, there's special tools that make little pieces of paper. So if you see me, you can perhaps see I'm putting that little piece of paper in the camera just to give you an idea of how small those insects are. So real tiny, but sometimes they are problematic in your garden. So you might have heard about these jumping plant lice. All right, next, cicada or not? It's a beautiful looking creature. And in this case, we actually do have another cicada. This is known as the showy Asian cicada because of its brilliant colors. And those colors look like someone took a highlighter or a little neon paint and painted both the wings and the head of these beautiful and quite large cicadas. So what about this one? Cicada or not? See someone's tiny little finger holding a tiny little insect. So I see a few yeses and maybe a yes. So in fact, this is a cicada. This is known as the little mesquite cicada, and it's one of the smallest species that are found in the United States. Quite tiny, but quite loud if you're ever out in the Southwest to hear them as they buzz in the summertime. So this one should be something that's familiar to everyone. So cicada or not, so right away, I'm seeing a lot more responses to this. We're feeling a lot more confident, which is wonderful. And in fact, you're right. That's not a cicada. That is a grasshopper or a locust. And I throw that slide in here because a lot of people refer to cicadas as locusts, but really they're two very different organisms. So if you follow some of the Judeo-Christian belief systems and you hear about a plague of locusts, you'll note that the locusts aren't a whole bunch of cicadas that are producing that plague, but rather they're these grasshoppers. So grasshoppers, in particular, certain groups are known as locusts, and cicadas really aren't locusts. Now, sometimes those names get associated with each other because of things like the periodic cicadas, where you have this huge number of individuals and therefore they get linked together. Locusts also have a song, and you can hear katydids and crickets and grasshoppers sing sometimes. So that name sometimes gets applied to cicadas for that reasons, but they're very different organisms. So just know, don't use locusts to describe a cicada. All right, cicada or not? And so some of us are thinking yes, no. Again, this is a cicada. This is the Indonesian giant cicada, the largest cicada in the world. And I stole this picture from iNaturalist because I've never seen one or have one in my collection. But that's a nice, hefty, about 5 inches long. So a very large cicada that also has a massive song. So groups of these singing together supposedly have the same kind of decibel resonance as you would get if you were standing 20 feet from a jet engine. So very loud when a chorus of these are singing. And so we're almost done. So just a few more pictures. So will cicada or not? So I'm sure all the gardeners in the group are going to give the right answer right away, saying no, no, no. And this is not a cicada. It is a group of insects that belong to the giant aphids. They're quite large for aphids, but you'll notice they have very long antennae and the wings fold up over the body when they do have wings. And cicadas' wings fold over the body and they have really short antennae. So that's an easy way to look and determine if it's a cicada or not. And this is our last image, a cicada or not. So a few yeses, another question or two. So this is a cicada known as the emerald cicada from South America. But you can see very tiny antenna, pretty long wings that fold over the body, and a fat, chunky, kind of barrel-shaped body. So as you go out and explore, I think a lot of us had this understanding that there's a general feel to what a cicada is, what a cicada looks like. And so the next question is, what group of insects do cicadas belong? We had a wonderful set of images looking at cicadas and some not so close relatives like the grasshopper and some relatives of the cicada like the aphid. So what group do they belong? Are cicadas a type of beetle? Are they a type of true fly? Are they a type of grasshopper or katydid, as we mentioned? Are they going to be a group of mantids? What about cockroaches? Maybe even ants and bees and wasps, or true bugs? You can use the chat if you wish to guess, and then I will let you know as we're thinking. I know it's early to have a quiz already this morning, but think about where you think these cicadas belong, because knowing who the relatives are tell you a lot about the biology of the creature you're looking at. So cicadas belong to a group of insects known as the true bugs. So there's some characters that make them true bugs. One is they have piercing sucking mouth part. So they have this long proboscis, unlike ants or mantids or beetles that have mandibles that they chew things up. They have a spear that they jab into things and suck juices. Now they could be seed juices like milkweed bugs, or they could be blood like bed bugs, or they could be sap like aphids, or they could be things like juices from a caterpillar or another insect like assassin bugs, like the wheel bug. That a lot of you might be seeing the nips of wheel bugs right now because they're going strong. So true bugs, they're known as hemipterans. They have 4 wings. The front wings tend to be thickened in some of these groups, but again, they have this piercing, sucking mouth part, which helps us separate them from most insects that have chewing mouth parts. And so there's a few ways to look at that group because there's a lot of diversity. And we're going to look at the one group that has a sciencey term called the Achitioranca. We don't need to know that, but I just want you to realize that there's different groupings within the true bugs, the Heteroptera, and then you have the Sternoranca, aphids, and scale insects. And then this wonderful group that includes cicadas and tree hoppers and plant hoppers that are doing a lot of cool things out in the world. Although a lot of times, if you, again, you are interested in gardening, we worry about them because aphids and things like plant hoppers, because they're piercing and sucking the juices from your plants. Typically, they don't impact the plants that way by sucking too many juices, for example, but rather they can transmit diseases. So they can move virus from plants to plants and impact things that way. So the group that we're really interested in is the Cicadidae. So they can be 23 to 55 millimeters, so pretty tiny to quite large. And as I mentioned, they have this really fat, thin head. So if you look from the top down, it's really thin, a lot of eyes, because a lot of things like to eat cicada, so they can keep an eye out. Plus they can use them to find other cicadas. the wings folding nicely over their body. And again, they have this relatively basic shape. And I think as you were looking, as we went through, you're like, oh yeah, that looks like a cicada. That looks like a cicada. Even if you had no background, cicadas just have a cicada-y looking appeal to them. Now, one of the great things about cicadas are they are like birds in that they sing, or like frogs in that they sing to attract females. And we'll listen to some songs in just a little bit. And those songs are specific, just like frog songs are, just like bird songs are. And if you train your ear, you can go out and impress your friends, family, a complete stranger, and say, oh, yeah, that's a dusky singing cicada, and impress those people, or just do it for fun for yourself. And we'll also talk about their life cycle, because the life cycle is a good way as a common ground to look at all the interesting behavior and ecology that we see with cicadas. So if you wanted to go and understand what's happening in the Commonwealth, this is a list of the cicadas that we have within the Commonwealth. Those that are listed in blue are more common and are more likely to be seen across the state. Now, those in the Hampton Roads area tend to be dog-day cicada, southern dog-day cicada, scissor grinding cicada, swamp cicada are the most common that we get around here. And then this northern dusk singing cicada is probably common in the peninsula. But again, in Virginia, these are the ones that you're going to see or hear at least. Now, I mentioned we talked about life cycles. So there's two major life cycles that we find within insects. The one that you might be most familiar with is the life cycle that's known as holometabolis or complete metamorphosis. So I wouldn't be doing my job as a professor not to throw some of these fancy words in, because they help you impress people, or they might help you in a word search or something like that. But again, I need to give you a little bit of science mixed in here. So holometabolis or complete metamorphosis, and what it means by complete is you have an egg, you also have a larvae, like in the case of this monarch, and then there's a stage that the insect rearranges its shape, called a chrysalis or pupa, and they go from this kind of worm-like creature to a very different adult in the case of the monarch butterfly. So egg, larvae, pupae, adult. So these are the complete set of changes of metamorphosis. In incomplete metamorphosis, you as a baby look very much as you do as an adult. So it's known as hemimetabolous metamorphosis. And the only thing that's different as you grow is you start to develop wings and genitalia. When you're a baby, no wings, no genitalia, but as you become an adult, you start to get wings and genitalia. So you look at any true bug, you look at a cockroach, you look at a mantid, at little babies, they have no wings and no really genitalia. As they mature and molt, those wings develop, and so do the genitalia. Now that's great, because now we can think about how do cicadas do their cicada-y thing. And so I think a good point is always to start with eggs. So if you are in Northern Virginia now, or across the northeast of Virginia, and the magic cicada, the periodic cicadas have been singing for weeks and weeks, they've been mating for weeks, now they're all starting to die off. And in a few weeks from that die off, the eggs will hatch. And as the eggs hatch, a little nymph that looks quite like a tiny cicada without wings, of course, will either crawl down the tree or fall off from the limb. Now remember, they're tiny, so they can fall all the way to the ground. They're not injured, burrow down in the ground, and then you sit. And then you start to feed on the plant juices from the roots of a nearby tree. And then you might crawl a little bit, feed some more, crawl a little bit, feed some more. And over time, you're going to start to develop and grow. You'll molt your skin underground, you'll grow a little bit bigger. And depending on the type of species that you have, of course, the ones in the news and for my little mug are the 17-year cicada. So it takes about 17 years for them to get enough nutrients to grow, to be ready to crawl up out of the ground, climb up on a tree, and then leave their last exoskeleton or their skin behind. We sometimes call them cicada shells, although technically they're not shells, but that's fine to call them that. Their technical word is exuvia. And you pull yourself out, and now you have to wait for the exoskeleton to firm up because they're smushy, just like a soft crab. And now you're ready to go out and do what all animals do, mate and then die. So this life cycle takes quite a long time, depending again on the species. But eggs, nymphs, grow, you eat, grow, you eat, grow, you eat. You become adults, you mate, and then you die. Now, as the female is going about laying her eggs, and this is a special device which is found on the cicada and other insects, it's called an ovipositor. That's an egg laying device. It has a little saw on the end that she saws under the bark and plants an egg. And she does that because it provides a nice little shelter for her developing egg. Now, when she does do that, she can cut into some of that vascular tissue of the plant, and it can kill the edges of branches. Look, it's called flagging. So you can see this tree has some flagging because there was a lot of cicadas. They laid a lot of eggs. But for mature trees and big trees, that's not a true problem. Next year, they'll come back quite well. It's not going to kill your tree. It doesn't impact all the photosynthetic capabilities of that tree. But what happens in some cases, if you're a young or small tree, you are going to be inundated with cicadas, like you might be up at Northern Virginia and again, Maryland and Northeast, even down in Tennessee, and that might kill small saplings. But for the most part, even those periodic cicadas up north aren't doing a huge problem. Now, one of the things that is interesting is if you're moving around rocks or switching around logs, especially this time of the year, the cicadas who've been just eating and hanging out for their lifespan start to move towards the surface. And if you pick up such as flagging or the stones, you can see them hanging out closer to the surface. But what I want you to notice with this image is that while they are close to the surface, they're associated with these root beds. So they can crawl around and just suck that plant juice out of the roots. Now, again, you have this emergence, and that emergence is going to be associated with the type of cicada you are. So one that we keep hearing about again in the news is the periodic cicadas. And those periodic cicadas, there's a number of species. The ones that are out right now, there's 3 different species, just not one, but there's 3 different species in this group that's come out every 17 years. There's also another group of species that are going to be 13-year cicadas. And in the greater Hampton Roads region, we have a few small populations of 13-year cicadas, but we're just a little bit further south where we don't get the periodic cicadas. Got to go a little bit more inland and up to the north and sometimes to the west. And we'll talk about periodic cicadas towards the end because that's a hot topic right now. And then we have annual cicadas that come out every year, but in coming out every year, it's not that they only take 1 year to develop. They might take 3 to 10 years, but those emergences are staggered. So unlike the periodic cicada, when they synchronize and they all come out as once, these you might have some come out this year, you're gonna have some come out next year, you have some come out the following year, even though each of those could have taken 3-6 years to develop. And you can see this young man with all the periodic cicadas are sweeping up all those exoskeletons because thousands emerged at the same time. With the annuals, we have a lot of them emerging, but not thousands and thousands of cicadas. And how do they know when to come up? When do they emerge? Well, it's all based on temperature. When the soil gets warm enough, around 65 degrees or so Fahrenheit, this is going to be okay. The soil's warm. It's been warm for a while, right? So it's not just that there was a warm spell and then it's going to get cold. So the soil has heated up sufficiently for a week or so. And that's a cue for the cicadas to start to move up, hang onto a tree, onto a brick, on the side of the house, car tire, pull themselves out of their old exoskeleton, and then be ready to go off, find a mate, lay eggs if you're female, or after you mate as a male, you die, and then the next generation will come in the future. Now, different cicada species have different times that they come out. So if any of you do things like frog watch, or you keep track of plant phenology, cicadas also have phenology. And I need to make a graphic for Virginia, and I've just been a little bit lazy about it because I have to look up the data and do it myself, but I pulled one from Florida. And the take home message is there's very distinct times of year that very different cicadas come out. So again, if you're getting interested in cicadas, you want to do some cicada watching, this whole summer is a wonderful time to look for the different types, different species of cicada that come out. Now has some really significant evolutionary reasons in it as well. And that is when they come out, yes, they have different songs, but by coming out at different times of the year, it limits the potential for cicadas to hybridize or mix genetics with each other or mate with the wrong species. That means you might not make babies. So it's a way to make sure who mates with who aligns with the species. So you have staggered emergences. And those emergencies sometimes are just little holes in the ground. Here I have a centrifuge tube. Some of you, I use them to collect insects. I'm holding one up to the screen. It's about an inch long, just so you get scale. Little tiny hole, or some, depending on the soil type, make these beautiful turrets where they excavate and build a mound, this wonderful tube, so they can crawl out of it and emerge before they molt and become an adult. Now that we were babies, we were in the ground for a little bit, we've come out, we're emerged, we're ready to mate. And in doing their mating, one of the things that we know that cicadas do is that they sing. So this is a diagram that's cut away of a male cicada. And what I want you to notice is it has this big air chamber. And that air chamber helps to resonate, helps to allow for vibrations and the building of the sound of that cicada to carry and bring in the females. So if we look at the external anatomy, so remember inside its abdomen, it has this resonance chamber. You have the tympana that helps to make the sound of the cicada. You can pick up the wings. Now, depending on the species of cicada, sometimes this is obvious, sometimes it's not as obvious. It's a little bit inconspicuous. And also in male cicadas, you have these lobes, and those tympanic membranes or these lobes here are going to open and relax. So as this is being pulled by those muscles, we can see there's some muscles in here, right? So you have a muscle here. It's pulling that like the strumming of a guitar or a banjo string. Those flaps are opening to change the pitch. So if I just started to hum one note and put my hand over my mouth and went, oh, I can change how that sounds. Plus I have this big air chamber to help resonate that. Different songs from different cicadas have different frequencies, have different pitches, and have different patterns or rhythms in that song. And that's how that's all accomplished by these wonderful little insects. So I want to play some songs for you, and hopefully that works because I've linked it up to my computer's audio. So we'll hope the technology helps me play along. So we'll first play the northern dust singing cicada. If we're hearing that, let me know in the chat. Okay, so I know that gets annoying, but that was the northern dust singing cicada. Let's listen to the swamp cicada now and listen for differences. Not so much the volume, because again, it's on my computer, but differences in rhythm, pitch, and quality. Okay, so let's go to Lynn cicada. So we're at the third one now. You can see they look quite different, and hopefully we agree these first two sounded very different. And I hope you feel that while it was similar to the swamp cicada, it was a little bit more scratchier, a little bit more higher, a little bit more shrill than the swamp cicada, but it's similar to the swamp cicada. So we can listen now to the dwarf periodic cicada. So if you're up exploring around this Brood X, this is one that you might hear. Okay, and now we'll listen to the feral cicada, the more common of the periodic cicadas that are out. All right, so we have those two. Now, even though they look very similar, I think we can all agree there's very different songs. And then we'll end with the hieroglyphic cicada that is pretty common here, a smaller cicada, but packs quite a loud song, and you should be able to tell this one from the other species as well. So I hope we all agree that different songs from different species have different sounds. And if you took some time to study, again, you could go out and learn those different songs and know what it is just by what's singing. And I can tell in my neighborhood in Hampton that mostly what I find singing the northern dust singing cicadas and swamp cicadas. So pretty cool thing to listen, another skill set to put in your naturalist toolkit. Although I like cicadas and I think they're interesting, but their songs annoy me. So I can only listen to it so much before I find that it gives me a headache. And hopefully I didn't give anyone else a headache this morning, but a fun thing to know about. Another fun thing to know about is sex in cicadas. And we can go out and determine the different sex of our cicadas. And you can even do this with their exoskeletons or their shells. So you can find these shells on the tree, and you can look at the terminal end of their abdomen, so the tip of their abdomen. And if it has this little lobe-like structure, and you can see these little lobes, it is a female. If you go and look at the male, it's more bulbous, it's more rounded than having these lobes. And so I've used this for school projects or summer camp projects where we've gone and found cicadas and, hey, can you tell if it's male or female? We keep track of that and we can compare sex ratios or just making it a little bit educational. But again, if you just want to impress people, you can just pick up those exoskeletons and say, hey, this was a female cicada. And everyone's like, oh, wow, how did you know that? And you can say, oh, well, Dr. Dash told me. Or you could just take all the credit and go, I'm just that good. I know how I'm one with those cicadas. Now, we can also tell with the adults. Now, when we start to look into the latter part of the season, the cicadas start to die off and they'll become conspicuous. They tend to be on the ground or the grass, your porch, and your pool. And you can look at them, flip them over on their backs, and look to see if the belly segments, in this case, it's segment 7. So you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If it's lobed, you kind of see where there's a lobe or it looks like it's been punched in, that's a good sign that it's a female. The other is it has this ovipositor. So this black line is what we saw before with the egg laying. It folds out from the body so she can saw into trees to lay some eggs. So now you know how to tell in a female, and then we can look at the male. And the male, I think, is a lot easier. It has those big lobes, right, the opercula that are associated with changing tone for the song, right? So we have the tympana that helps to make the song. Then you have these flaps that can move and vibrate to change the air that's going in, to change that pattern. So they're obvious here. We can see a male, very large opercula. We also have that segment is straight. It's not curved in, as in the female. And also the male's genitalia is more boxy. It doesn't look like a rod that would be used to lay eggs. So I thought we would play another quick game called male or female. So we have 5 different cicadas, and we're going to look to see if they are male or female. So male or female. So we'll start with number 5, and you can just put M or F in the chat. Or again, just think about it in your mind. So M or F in the chat. So is it male or female? So number 5, you can see those lobes. And so that is a male. What about number 4? So again, you can use a chat or just your minds. I see a lot of us are thinking about things in our mind. So the 4 is, I'm getting a lot of Fs now. So 4 is a F. It is a female, right? So we don't have the opercula that are associated near the hind leg, but they're on the abdomen. And we have that egg laying device, the ovipositor, and you can see how divided that last segment is. Here it's straight. Here it's deeply divided. It's lobed. Right, so for 3, male or female, so I'm seeing a number of M's come up in the chat. So yes, that is a male, quite conspicuous opercula. Number 2, male or female. Now this is the easiest one that's on here because the answer's kind of on the slide, where you have the opercula being identified by the image that I stole from the internet. So that is a male. And then finally, number 1, male or female. And yes, female, right? So you can see where that the egg laying device lays up in the body, a little bit of a lobe, but no opercula. So we did a good job. Now you can go out and impress your friends, families, and complete strangers about your sexing abilities when it comes to cicadas. It's a good skill to have. I don't know who you would impress, but someone might be impressed. I've never found anyone to be impressed with that skill, but I also talk to strangers in the park, which probably just freaks them out. But a good skill to have. Now, we have males, we have females. We know they get together and they lay eggs. And now that you have all these cicadas out in the world, we can talk about how those cicadas are being utilized and talk about cicada predators. So this background of this image was a picture that I took in Congaree National Park of these big, sometimes called banana spiders. And you can see the banana spider here on top of a cicada. The image is a little fuzzy because I just didn't focus my camera correctly, so I put it as a background. But there's other images that I was lucky to have myself would take from the internet, and I just wanted to share some of the diversity of organisms that rely on cicadas for food resource, especially in places where you have broods of the periodic cicada emerging, this is going to be a time of bounty for many different groups, from things like copperhead snakes that we think about being this big predator going after rodents, but feeding on cicadas quite readily. We can also think about box turtles feeding on cicadas. We can have things like even cute little house sparrows that we think about eating seed, taking the opportunity to feed on a cicada when they find them. Things like bats also are going to rely heavily on cicadas. Fungi, and this is a unique fungus that's growing out of the nymph of a cicada. So this is the fruiting body, the mushroom that's coming out of that cicada. And we'll talk about what you might have heard about or read about with the fungi in the periodic cicadas. Mantids eating cicadas, and you can see that wonderful mantid chewing down that cicada. And things again like squirrels, which are relatively opportunistic, even though we think about squirrels eating nuts and such, they are good predators in their own right. And of course, perhaps the most famous cicada predator of all is the cicada wasp, one of the largest wasp in North America, close to, if not exceeding the maximum size wasp in Virginia. Another big wasp is this introduced European hornet that some people have. It's a wonderful insect, although it shouldn't be here in North America. They're European and Western Asian, but you have, they're quite large, but the cicada killer is large on its own right. Kind of more elongate and tapered abdomen, not as fat. And for me, the European hornets just have a big, nasty head, where the cicada killers, the head's a little bit more delicate. In fact, cicada killers are pretty nice. The adults feed on sap and nectar, playing a minor role in pollination. They have an interesting set of behaviors where the male finds some exposed ground, some sandy ground, and they set up little territories. They will swarm at each other. They'll come towards you, just like male carpenter bees might have come towards you as they're feeding on your porch or your deck. You get too close, they come up to chase you away. They're not going to sting you. In fact, males can't sting. With those stinging insects, it's the ovipositor, the egg-laying device, that delivers the venom. So males don't lay eggs, so they cannot sting you. You can put them in your hand, you can stick them in your mouth. They're not going to sting you. Now, of course, bees and wasps and ants could still bite you if they're males, but they're not going to sting you. So they have these little territories. Here's a perfect piece of ground. Females are attracted to that ground, mate with that male. She excavates a whole bunch of tubes and tunnels. And at the end of those tubes and tunnels, there's a little chamber that she goes out and she stings the cicada. She paralyzes the cicada with her venom. It doesn't kill the cicada. She wants it to stay fresh, so she wants it to stay alive and paralyzes it. Cicadas tend to weigh a lot more than them. So this came from a series of photographs of this gentleman who helped this cicada climb up, raised it into her arms, the cicada killer, so she could kind of jump off and fly. You will often find the cicada killers grabbing cicadas and climbing up something to get enough elevation to jump off to gain altitude to fly back to their nest. She lays an egg, and as her egg grows, that little grub will eat those cicadas alive. They're not going anywhere, and grow big and strong, which is an interesting bit of biology, right? Cicadas helping these cicada killers. But you also have things like velvet ants that can go around. They're not technically ants. They're going to be a group of wingless wasps that are parasites, and they lay their eggs on the grub of the cicada killer. So instead of feeding on the cicadas, it will feed on the cicada killer's baby and make more velvet ants in the future. So some of you might be familiar with that if you've seen Manduca or tobacco hornworms. You have the little white pupa coming up because it was a wasp that laid eggs. Her caterpillars inside the caterpillar eats it away. Now you have more wasps. Same thing with the cow killer or the velvet ant. Now, I put this slide here because a lot of people are worried about cicada killers, and I get a lot of emails or I see things online and everyone's really worried about them. They're not going to really bother you. Again, if you're friendly to them, they'll walk up your arm. It's not that big of a deal. Some people are worried about structural problems because they have things like walls. They'll notice that the cicadas killers are digging underneath, and it's really easy to get and tell them to leave your area. Now, a lot of people, again, might be upset because they're near walkways, because oftentimes there's sand that's put under to stabilize your patio or your walkway or in their playgrounds. And what they're looking for is that kind of special microhabitat, sandy, well-drained soil. So if you just wet it and douse it and make it really moist, they'll often move off because you don't have the right habitat. Also, you can just lay out tarp or some pieces of wood when you first see them being active, and that will dissuade them from moving away, or just let them be there. They're not going to bother you. You're playing an important role in nature. You're helping pollinators, and you're helping the control of the cicada population and enjoy a little bit of nature. Now, North America isn't the only place that you can find cicada killers. And there's some beautiful examples of wasps from other places in the world, like Australia, as well as in South America, like Brazil and Argentina, where you have these cicada killers that are going to utilize that resource. Very different looking wasps, but again, using those resources of the cicada. Now, as I promised, there's other things that are feeding on cicada. So you have some parasites, like this little flesh fly that lays their eggs, and they're going to feed on the cicada. You also have, and there's not a common name, which are called rhipisarid beetles. I think the common name is cedar beetles, but these rhipisarid beetles are going to lay eggs that are parasitizing those growing nymphs of the cicadas. And then also you might have heard there's Massosporia, which is a fungi that feeds on the cicada. It utilizes the cicada resources, feeding on it. That cicada then is going to house that fungi that's going to produce a fruiting body, which often comes out the butt of the cicada. And that cicada is still alive. So that cicada flies out. Now the fruiting body, which is sporulating, making spores, flies through the air. The wing currents take the spores, and now they can fall on other cicadas and complete the life cycle of that fungi. And so parasites manipulating the behavior in the brain of their host is a really interesting tale to tell, but I'll just give you a little bit of a taste of it with that fungus. Now, cicadas aren't defenseless. They're sometimes very good at camouflage. So if we look at that bark picture, you might notice that there is some cicada there. It's camouflage. They put it in red. They also can have these colorations, startle colorations, or aposematic colorations, as red and black, orange and black, sometimes mimicking wasp. So predators avoid them. They have the ability to make a nasty song. So you could imagine if you're going to the refrigerator, you're going to grab a grape, and it starts to screech at you. You'll drop that grape pretty quickly. And so a predator picks them up. You'll hear them scream. If you looked at blue jays that pick up cicadas or feeding on them, you can hear the cicadas just yelling and hopefully startling that bird predator. They'll kick and flap their wings, especially towards mantids that are trying to sneak up at them. But you also have predator satiation. And that's what happens with the periodic cicadas. That is that everybody emerges at the same time. And sure, some predators are going to get a few individuals, but because we all emerge at the same time, roughly the same time, within weeks of each other, there's just too many for the predators to eat. Now, if there was 5 one day and 2 one day and 1 the other day, and on Friday there was 4 and Saturday there was 6, it's a lot easier for predators to get to them. And predator satiation is a common strategy for a number of animals. A famous example of that is wildebeest on the Masai Mara and the Serengeti Plain, that everyone gives birth to your calves roughly in the same month or so. So all the lions and the leopards and the hyenas, there's just too many babies to eat them all. So of course, some are going to survive for that species. Now you might, again, I mentioned this, but I just wanted to circle back around to relate to what's going to happen with your home. For the most part, Cicadas might do a little bit of damage, especially if you have new trees. They might produce that flagging, but not a big deal, especially when we don't have these mass emergences. Now, if you were up north and you're a little bit more concerned about that, there are some things that you can do, like spraying them off with the garden hose, or putting foil around the trunk so they can't climb up as easily. Now, of course, if they climb up on the neighbors, they can fly over. Sometimes insect barrier tape, but what we mean about barrier tape is not like sticky traps. Sticky traps are horrible things to use because they stick other things. Some of us in the Virginia area might think about using that tape to keep an eye out for lanternflies, an introduced species that we don't want here, but birds and other insects get stuck, so you really don't want to use that at all. Netting around your plants. Now, of course, it has to be small enough the cicada can't get in, and netting's bad too because birds get tangled up in fruit tree netting. So not a great idea to use netting as well. And another not great idea, but sometimes you find people suggesting it, is pesticides, but pesticides can kill pollinators, just not your target species. And of course, change the ecosystem of your home and yard and garden. And anyone who gardens and anyone who has a yard knows the insect form the basis for all the life in your garden, from pollination to food from birds. So you don't want to hurt anyone that way. Now, cicadas, besides just being around your home and yard and garden or out in the park, have also infiltrated our own history as humans. And they are a popular subject in a lot of Asian art, as we can see with this enamel vase and this wood block painting. Sometimes you even see them in fashion. So I just keep tracking. Sometimes things come up with cicadas, like these earrings. And then I don't know, but someone thought it would be nice for this model. And I think this was in Vogue or something, where she just has a cicada stuck to her face for some reason. But again, making it into pop culture. And sometimes cicadas even being little toys. Now, a lot of us might interact with cicadas in a much more personal way because they can be eaten. And especially now with all the emergence of those cicadas, there's a lot of people who are going out and having cicada recipes, eating those cicadas, putting them on pizza, a little bit of butter, a little bit of garlic, and frying up the pupae like you might do shrimp stir fry. It is good to eat insects. They are high in proteins, low in fats. They take less resources, but depending where you get them, of course, there's potential for parasites. And there's an interesting study that looked at people who were eating cicadas and found that mercury was present in cicadas. Of course, you're not eating a lot of them, but because they live so long, they have the ability to pick up heavier metals in the soil. So you might be tempted to eat cicadas, eat one or two for the experience, but I wouldn't make them a major dietary item. So say you missed Brood X, you didn't get to go into this northern part of Virginia, this yellowish area for Brood X, and you want to find where you can try cicadas in the future. Well, we can do that because across the United States, there's different broods of those cicadas, so different parts. Now, Virginia last summer, this brood 9 in red was out and about. Further west, this blue, we'll be able to see it in 2029. So you might have to wait a while to try cicadas, but you could try to plot where they're out and about to experience them. Again, those periodic cicadas are doing that because of avoiding predators. They're going to limit competition with others by having these periodic emergences. And it's thought that this periodic emergence is related to cooling climates and the cycling of glacial periods that pushed species around during the Ice Age. And so one of the things that you see and that's isolated these different populations to give you those different broods is thought to have been greatly influenced by the glacial movements. And I mentioned before, there's these two themes that we see with these periodic cicadas, a more northern 17 years and a more southern 13 years. And a lot of people get really interested in these prime numbers of why is it prime? It's just an interesting thing that's happened in nature. No one really knows. I know people are looking at that, but you have these 13 and 17-year cicadas, and there's different species that make up that group. As I mentioned before, for our 17-year cicada, there's 3 that we can find. Now, if you wanted to go out and you collected some cicadas, or you're growing up, now most of them are starting to die up in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. But if you look at their color pattern, so if it's mostly orange on the bottom, and there's a little bit of orange behind the eye, it's known as the feral cicada. If it's quite a bit smaller, all black, it's the dwarf periodic cicada. And if it has a little bit of orange on their belly, but not by their eye, it's the Decula periodic cicada. This one's much more difficult to find. They're mixed in, but you might have thousands of these and a couple hundreds of these and maybe a few dozen of these. They're a little bit harder to find. I only have one in my collection, and I have people looking for me, but not as easily picked up. But again, these different pockets that you can find of these populations or broods of periodic cicadas that have this really long generation time, 17 years, that are going to come out. And as again, you can see there's this little bit of, they're calling it pink, but it's more this purple of these broods that are kind of in the area of Hampton Roads. But for the most part, we're not anywhere near periodic cicadas. And if we wanted to see this cycle, we wanted to go out and see, we have to travel to experience this long generation time. And again, we're just looking at that as we talked about before. So in the next few weeks, eggs were hatched, the nymphs were moved to the soil. They live for a very long time in the soil, nearly 2 decades. Eventually, temperatures are warm. They're going to emerge out, become adults, sing their songs, annoy everyone in the area, and then die off. And of course, the rotting corpses of those cicadas are going to stink and make people unhappy. But a nice little web page is called Cicada Mania, and they have this phenology of what's happening. And we can see as we're moving towards July, there's going to be some die-off. Now we'll start to see some of the damage, and the eggs hatch the next few weeks. So a little bit about that life history. So if you want to know more about cicadas, of course, insects as a whole, there's a lot of different science projects, citizen science projects. Cicada Safari was an app that you could use to take pictures of cicadas, especially the periodic cicadas, to help gather information. There's some things on iNaturalist, if you're familiar with that, which is an app or something you can use on your computer itself. You take pictures of nature. You can suggest an identification. Someone else can suggest identification. You upload it, but all that data helps to get collected. So we know about, for example, the Virginia Cicada Project. What cicadas are occurring where? What's their phenology? When are they coming out? When are they dying off? And that's really important data that we don't have, but you going out and providing that information is really important. Or you can go look for cicadas and other bugs and share them and let me know what you find, or give me $1 million, which I'm just teasing you about that. But go out and look and explore. And so this is just a little bit about my cicada collection. We can see a little bit of my periodic cicadas, some colorful cicadas, and things I haven't identified the species. But that's a fun little thing, especially since they die. You can pick them up off the ground and see what's out in the world and explore the biodiversity around you. And if you have young ones that are around, you can take those exoskeletons and paint them up, or you could take the dead cicadas and dip them in paint like little stamps and make cards or such. An example would be with the 17-year cicada, but you could do it anytime. And there's also a lot of web pages that you can find that give you suggestions for origami cicadas. Again, being a really important component of some Asian cultures, so you could explore that side. And I think we have a little bit of time left for questions, so I'm happy to take any questions right now. Now, I did see in the chat So the question was, does the male die immediately after mating? He hangs around for
Sean, we are not hearing you. We've lost you. We've lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
You're back.
Okay. Did we hear the answer to my question?
No.
Okay. So the question was, does the male die immediately after mating? And my response is no. And that's not instant like it would be in a honeybee, because the male honeybee mates with the female. He actually pops off his ediogus, his penis, and he dies. This is a male cicada will hang on for a little bit longer, but he's going to die. Another question that came in was, does the female mate with only one male? And yes, she mates with one male. There might be one or two species that there's multiple matings, but I think it's only one, and then she's going to die. But I'm sure there's some exceptions, but I think she only mates once, lays her eggs, and she's going to pass away shortly after as well. Again, if you have questions, be happy to put them in the chat, or you could turn on your audio and I would be happy to answer your questions there. Unless now you're all cicada experts and have no questions at all.
This has been fascinating. Now, I'm from Chicago, and I miss the fact that we did not get cicadas here in Virginia, because I have fond memories of cicada time. But this has just been so fascinating.
Yeah, and it's, hit or miss. Some people I know traveled. I didn't make it up to see the cicadas this year, but I did go out to Roanoke for a whole day just to collect those cicadas. And it's kind of a neat thing to go and see. And something that we didn't talk about, but since it came up that I want to mention, is that you can think about these cicadas that are going to take 17 years to develop. And so 20 years, nearly 2 decades, a lot's changed. So their forest habitat could be broken down, paved over. We have churches, we have parking lots. So those cicadas that are living underground, of course, die because there's no trees there. But their habitat's dramatically altered in that time frame. And so that habitat alteration is really changing those insects, especially around Washington, D.C. We have so much urban sprawl, which used to be these areas of cicadas. You don't have any. And I have friends that live in newer areas, and they're like, I don't have cicadas anywhere, but down the road, there's plenty. And then when we start to look at it, well, down the road is a housing development that was built in the 50s or the 60s. So it's an old neighborhood where they've been able to survive, opposed to this radical alteration of the habitat. Now, there was a question in the chat about cicadas in the south of France. So I don't know what particular species. So what I did is I just went to iNaturalist as we were chatting, and I went to the explore option, and I just put cicadas France. So there's 12 species that are recorded from France. And of course, if you're not familiar with iNaturalist, you can go down and they'll give you individual points. So you could look around and see what cicadas happen to be in that area. But at least iNaturalist has about 12 species that are recorded. And of course, you could do that for anywhere. If you're just curious, you can put cicadas, if you can type, unlike myself. So you can type in cicadas, and we could put in Virginia. It will give us a map of the recordings of Virginia. Notice there's a lot up north in the DC area. And then there's some places where there's no records of all about what species are there. And there's about 18 species. The most common right now, of course, being the periodic cicadas within the state. So there is a project that's keeping track of all those observations. And again, if you wanted to do something, go out, take some pictures of these areas and photograph them. So global warming is an important thing to talk about. And there's a question asked, will global warming cause a change in emergencies? And if it gets warmer, it should, because there needs to be enough heat to warm up the ground so they respond. And that could occur a little bit earlier than it typically does. Now, it might start to occur in, say, mid-May opposed to late May. But as, again, the climate changes, you might have that occurring much, much, much earlier. I don't know how much it would impact the cicadas per se, outside that there could be some other weather events associated with that, because it's not like they're relying on plants for food resources or something like that, so they could have them to utilize, right? So it's not like if bees come out too early and the plants aren't coming out, then the bees don't have nectar, or the plants are coming out and they're blooming, but it's too early for the insects to come out to pollinate them. So in this case, because they're kind of, just laying their eggs on the tree, feeding a little bit of tree sap, if it warms up, the tree should be there and the cicadas can be doing their own things. Another comment in the chat was, neighbors have removed many trees in their area. So another chat came in. In the neighborhood, will this impact cicada populations? Yeah, so especially since they're underneath and they're growing, cicadas that are on those trees, when they get removed, they have to kind of crawl off and look for other tree roots to grow on. And if you don't have any trees, they're going to starve. It's just not any kind of plant root sap that they're feeding on, but trees. And when they do that, that's problematic. Now, the other question was, do cicadas roam or gather distant from their emergence locations? They can fly. They're pretty good flyers, but they tend to stay and not disperse too distantly. So you'll notice with those periodic cicadas, there's very discrete bubbles of that population. If they were going off and dispersing for miles and miles, you would see more multicolored mosaic opposed to these discrete kind of situations, because they're relatively confined. So it's not like new neighborhoods potentially will have new cicadas moving in. If you eliminate that population goes extinct, it's unlikely to come back. Now, of course, slow increments could move things back, but the slow increments of spreading those populations back out are against massive and much more rapid habitat alteration, urbanization, and things of that nature. So the big differences that Fred has asked between cicadas and locusts. So two very different groups of insects. One is the Orthoptera, crickets, locusts, and katydids. The other is true bugs, the Hemiptera, cicadas, assassin bugs, kissing bugs. So if you look, and the easiest way is if you just look at their face. Orthopterans, grasshoppers, and their kin have chewing mouth parts. So you can see their mouth parts. If you put your finger through them, some of the katydids will bite you. They have big, massive mandibles. If any of you played with katydids as kids, they hurt. They're big, strong mandibles. If you all Google a weta, W-E-T-A, I think is how it's spelled, this Australian grasshopper thing, there's someone holding a carrot, feeding the carrot to that. Let's see if I can find that. So they're big. So you can see it eating this carrot. Here's its mandibles, right? And it's a big animal, right? That this guy, I don't know, thinks he's cool putting them on his head, but that's kind of cool. But these big mandibles. If you look at a aphid, or you look at a cicada, you look at another bug, they have a tube, a piercing, sucking mouth part like a mosquito. So it doesn't have mandibles to chew. It has this tube that it sticks into a plant, or sticks into you, or sticks into another insect. There's some little sawing going on to get the fluid moving, and then they can suck up the juices, put some saliva in, but suck up the juices. So easy way, if you're looking at it and it has big mandibles with licking teeth, locust, grasshopper. If it has a tube, then it is a cicada. Another question was, do adults feed? Some of the species, the adults will feed. They will suck plant juices from the trees that they're on. So they have that piercing, sucking mouth part that they'll drive in and suck up juices from that plant.
Do we
Other
have,
questions, or are we all questioned out and ready to go explore for the day?
I think that we have answered all the you have answered all the questions. This has been fascinating, and we are so grateful. Thank you ever so much.
You're welcome. I had a blast.
All right. All right.